Good evening, everyone. Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 16, 2022, the committee is meeting on its study of the Canada People's Republic of China relations with a focus on police stations or Chinese police stations in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses, particularly joining us on Zoom. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen, it's the little earth symbol there, of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. And the clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses and members joining virtually have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. So we have MP Assassi substituting for MP Dubourg, and MP Genis is substituting for MP Dancho today. So I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the first panel. In order, we will hear from Dr. Roram Chantal, Associate Professor of Political Science, Université de Moncton, by video conference. Dr. Christian Leuprecht, Professor, Royal Military College of Canada, by video conference. And then finally, Laura Harth, Campaign Director, Fondation Safeguard Defenders. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening comments. Keep an eye on the speaker. I'll give you sort of a time when you're getting close to your 5 minutes. And that'll leave us enough time for lots of questions, which I'm sure we will all have tonight. So we will start for the first 5-minute commentary and introduction. Dr. Chantal, please proceed. You're on mute, sir. We need T-shirts.
Sorry about that. Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is, for me, a wonderful opportunity to answer questions from your honorable colleagues and to try to make a modest contribution to the ongoing discussion on the Chinese issue. I am very pleased and sincerely thank the committee. I will focus on the topic that has been proposed by the committee for this appearance. So I will address the issue of alleged police stations from China in Canada. First, Mr. Chair, what would prove the existence of these police stations in Canada and elsewhere? According to the Spain-based NGO Safeguard Defenders, China has as many as 102 overseas police stations in 53 countries. 3 of these posts would be in the Greater Toronto Area. More recently, media revealed the existence of 2 similar posts in Quebec, the Centre Sino-Québec de la Rive Sud and the Service pour la Famille Chinoise du Grand Montréal, so both in the Montreal area. Both of these institutions have denied the allegations and asked for the presumption of innocence. That said, Mr. Chair, some observers believe that proxies for Chinese police abroad could be much more widespread. The well-known American magazine Newsweek has investigative work that points in this direction. Indeed, in addition to police proxies, Newsweek says it has identified at least 9 other Chinese support centers in the United States. It should be noted that, according to the Spanish NGO, some of these centers are sometimes established with the help of the countries where they are deployed, even if that's not the case in Canada. Chinese authorities and media outlets deny these allegations, but they speak of sites operated sometimes by volunteers from the local Chinese communities to help Chinese nationals abroad. The People's Daily, a CCP media outlet, reported that in some places that have poor law and order, such as Africa and South America, these service stations offer security, fire, and ambulance teams. In Canada, for example, the Chinese embassy has confirmed the addresses of some similar stations identified by the media. Second, Mr. Chair, why would China undertake to establish clandestine police stations abroad? Among other reasons, there is the anti-corruption campaign launched by President Xi Jinping since his arrival in power. Since then, over 900,000 party members have already been disciplined. 42,000 have been expelled and prosecuted. Chinese undercover police stations would also help achieve the goals of this anti-corruption campaign. The alleged purpose of these stations would be to force citizens to return home to face the Chinese judicial system. So it's important to note that according to a Chinese Vice Minister of Public Security, by 2021, Beijing had persuaded 210,000 people to return to face charges of telecommunications fraud. In one case cited in some media reports, a Chinese citizen living in Canada was reportedly pressured to return to China to face charges of embezzling nearly $380,000 Canadian dollars in public funds. So finally, Mr. Chair, I think this is also important. How is the work of these clandestine police stations related to the work of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Department? This is a particularly important question for me. Historically, China has always demonstrated a desire to maintain control over both Chinese at home and abroad. The party describes the work of the United Front as a means for the party to unite all the sons and daughters of the Chinese nation, both inside and outside, in support of the party's goal of national renewal. Chinese police stations would be linked to China's strategy of domestic and international influence through the United Front. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Chantal. We'll now go to Dr. Leuprecht for 5 minutes or less, sir.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the invitation. I will be speaking English, but don't hesitate to ask your questions in the official language of your choice.
Beijing's espionage and interference are now the single greatest threat to Canada's democratic way of life. The PRC is intent on gaining control of Canadian critical minerals and is actively running influence campaigns over resource development. Balloons and election interference are merely the latest episode in a long list of hostile hybrid warfare efforts perpetrated by the CCP against Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's staunch refusal to convene a public inquiry is actively jeopardizing Canada's security and its bilateral relationship with its most important strategic ally. Beijing's corruption of Canadian business and politics poses a national security problem to the United States, in part because the US shares intelligence with Canada. Recent unclassified versions of CSIS annual reports repeatedly warned about the state capture and elite capture of Canadian political, business, financial, educational, and societal elites and institutions. Beijing invests heavily to make influential opinion leaders beholden to the PRC, who are then induced to repeat and lend credibility to the CCP's political disinformation. I know of Canadian academics who have been offered thousands of dollars to co-publish articles with scholars from China. Others have received lucrative trips, all expenses paid, by the regime in Beijing. In the same way, the PRC pays off politicians. Since 2015, CSIS has called out select Canadian politicians by name. Australia's experience shows that no government is immune. In 2016, Australia's Liberal Trade Minister Andrew Robb announced that he would not run again after having negotiated deals that were exceptionally favorable to China, including a free trade agreement. Robb then took up an $880,000 a year job with a billionaire closely connected to the CCP and its trade policy. As Trade Minister, Robb negotiated a 99-year lease for the Australian Port of Darwin with that same Chinese billionaire. In 2017, Labour Senator Sam Dastyari quit the Australian Senate over accepting donations from entities with links to the CCP. The senator had even tipped off one such donor about being the likely subject of a counterintelligence operation. In 2020, the founder of a Chinese language school in Canberra made an unsuccessful run at a seat in Australia's Senate. Turns out that he had a long history of activity with the PRC's United Front Work Department, which is tasked with mobilizing diaspora communities to meddle in foreign states. UFWD's illicit activities have been called out by CSIS, the Privy Council, and the Federal Court. Under broad guidance from CCP's consulates, the UFWD co-opt staff of targeted politicians, facilitates the clandestine transfer of funds, recruits potential targets, suppresses protest, and supports ethnic Chinese under its influence in their election bids. The PRC maintains the second largest diplomatic service in Canada for good reason. Blurry lines between Beijing state organs, Asian organized crime groups, select members of Canada's mainland Chinese immigrant community, and business interests are the hallmark of the CCP's covert, coercive, and corrupt influence, which has been systematically eroding resistance to the Chinese government from within. Suspect activities by the CCP in Canada date back at least as far as the ill-fated Project Sidewinder in the late 1990s. This joint CSIS RCMP investigation had been looking into the way Chinese intelligence and Chinese triads were collaborating on intelligence operations right here in Canada. The Canadian Prime Minister's awareness that the fortunes of some of his party's candidates may have been aided and abetted by the CCP is all too ironic. Out of sheer self-preservation in any democracy, a ruling political party would have forced someone with as abysmal a record during his second term as Chinese President Xi Jinping to resign. Xi would never have won a free and fair democratic election for a third term. Misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows, reads the famous line in Shakespeare's The Tempest. This refers to a man who, shipwrecked, seeks shelter beside a sleeping monster. Politics makes equally strange bedfellows, and one would hope that the Canadian decision makers finally wake up early enough to recognize the CCP for what it is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luprecht. We'll now go to Laura Harth, Campaign Director, Fonction Safeguard Defenders. Ms. Harth, you have 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Et bonsoir à tous les...
Good evening, honorable members of this committee. I thank you for this opportunity to appear on behalf of Safeguard Defenders, and I apologize at the outset to Francophone members because I will be speaking English, but I would also be pleased to try to answer your questions in French afterward.
So thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of Safeguard Defenders. Also, please allow me to express my sincerest gratitude to the Canadian journalists who have been shining a light on the PRC's transnational repression efforts in Canada, as well as, most importantly, to the activists and witnesses that have reported to the relevant Canadian authorities. We know the courage and sometimes very difficult choices it takes to come forward, and democratic societies owe it to you to ensure that those choices are not in vain. I imagine the members of this committee are well aware of the main findings in our September report 110 Overseas and its December follow-up Patrol and Persuade. I wish to highlight that everything in those reports is based exclusively on open source online statements from Chinese authorities and state or party media reports that are available for independent verification to all. Those sources openly describe how, starting in 2016, public security authorities from 4 local Chinese jurisdictions with large diaspora communities overseas have established over 100 so-called overseas police service centers in at least 53 countries. At least 5 of those stations have listed addresses in Canada, 3 in the Toronto area and 2 in the Vancouver area. In addition, in Patrol and Persuade, we flagged the existence of so-called overseas Chinese service centers, 2 of which are located in the Montreal area and have been the subject of recent media reporting. 2 more are listed by Chinese authorities, some of which, by the way, have linked subsidiaries across the country beyond the locations I mentioned. All these organizations share a direct and demonstrable linkage to the United Front Work Department. Understanding this linkage is fundamental. The United Front is the Communist Party of China's prime influence agency, which seeks to influence various public and private sector entities outside China, including, but not limited to, political, commercial, and academic spheres. To that end, on the one hand, the United Front promotes efforts that align policies and activities with CCP interests, while on the other hand, it seeks to divide and blunt CCP or PRC critics. Within this sticks and carrots approach that takes many different forms that all merit attention, as the CCP wages its hybrid war on liberal democracies and the international rules-based order, Safeguard Defenders focuses on the very extreme end of the Communist Party's transnational repression efforts. So-called persuasion to return operations, in which the PRC uses clandestine means to coerce individuals overseas to return to China for persecution. Methods range from going after family members back home to direct threats and harassment of targets overseas by consular or embassy personnel, proxies such as the individuals linked to the stations or private investigators, or even through the deployment of covert agents abroad. In the most extreme cases, methods include the luring to or entrapment of an individual in a third country or even kidnappings on foreign soil. While the People's Republic of China is far from the only authoritarian actor to engage in transnational repression, official numbers allow us to describe the PRC's efforts in this respect as what Freedom House defines as the most sophisticated, global, and comprehensive transnational repression campaign in the world. Staggering and as brazen a violation of national sovereignty the overseas police service stations are, unfortunately, they're also but the tip of the iceberg. It will take a comprehensive whole-of-society approach to counter the gamut of efforts underway to actively undermine fundamental rights and freedoms and democratic societies as a whole. To that end, allow me to make some initial policy recommendations. 1, continued community outreach is fundamental to grow the trust needed for witnesses to come forward and to receive timely insights into new developments and actors. To do so, it is crucial to put an immediate and firm stop to the legitimization of networks and individuals engaged in transnational repression through their engagement with Canadian institutions and officials. In that respect, it is crucial investigations cover the wider United Front activities on Canadian soil. I have some more recommendations, but maybe we can get to those in the questions. So thank you, and I do look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harth. We'll now go to our first round of questioning and to Mr. Chong for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 very quick questions for Madame Harth, and then I have questions for Professor Leuprecht. My 4 questions are first, about the 102 overseas police stations located in 53 countries, how many deportations have these overseas police stations been linked to? My second question is regarding persuasion to return operations. You state in your 110 overseas report that the PRC's Fox Hunt Skynet operations, which have claimed to return more than 10,000, coerced more than 10,000 people back to the PRC, are more modest in scale than the establishment of these police stations. So can you tell us in what ways is the establishment of these police stations a bigger threat than the persuasion to return operations, which have sent back some 10,000 people to the PRC? My third question is, what steps can be taken to stop the co-opting of Chinese overseas hometown associations by the United Front Work Department? And my fourth question is, media reports from March of this month indicate that the RCMP have begun investigating 2 police stations in Montreal and Brossard. Both of these stations are directed by Xixi Li, municipal councillor for Brossard. And my question with regard to this particular municipal councillor working at this police station, how common is it for elected municipal councillors to work at these police stations in your research that you've done? So those are my 4 questions. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to get them out there.
Thank you. I don't know how much time I have to respond.
You have about 3 minutes,
Okay.
maybe a little more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions. Regarding the number of deportations, so persuasion to return operations that we've been able to link directly to some of these stations, that number is 83. So that is the anecdotal evidence that we found linked to 3 of the jurisdictions. One of those evidence includes notoriously even video evidence put online by the Chinese authorities demonstrating how such an operation took place in a station in Madrid. So we know there's been at least 83 according to the authorities. Are these establishments a bigger threat than, for example, Operations Fox Hunt, Skynet? So Fox Hunt, Skynet, according to the last numbers given by the CCDI in October of 2022, have netted over 11,000 successful operations between 2014 and October 2022. Successful operations means more individuals can be included for each of those operations. I don't think the stations are necessarily a bigger threat. They're all part of the same pattern. And I think what's important in them, though, is that these stations are directly linked to the United Front Work Department. So the individuals and associations linked to them are manning these stations, may be engaged in transnational repression activities, which go much wider than that extreme end of persuasion to return, but are also engaged in those influence operations. So in that sense, they merit attention beyond what should be the focus of these persuasion to return operations. What steps can be taken to stop co-opting by the United Front Work Department? I think in the first place, it's publicly denouncing these activities, raising awareness within the communities, not within the communities, they know all too well what's going on, but within the wider society, within the communities that may be targets of influence operations, be it political circles, but academic circles, media, businessmen, everyone that may be the target of those influence operations, and really try actually to promote people from the diaspora communities that are not linked to them, give them a voice, because I think for too long, for decades, the main interlocutors for officials and for many other private sector institutions have exactly been the people that are tied to these networks. So we need to break that linkage. That will be a difficult process. It will be a long process, and it will really take a whole of society effort, but it starts by very clear messaging about what's going on. Now, for the last question on the municipal councillor, now, obviously, there's a presumption of innocence. So unless, until investigations are concluded, and we will see what will come out of that, to my knowledge, it is not necessarily common. But as an organization, as Safeguard Defenders, we are looking at the global framework rather than, the single individuals or associations. So I may not be the best person to respond to that.
Thank you for those answers. They're appreciated. I have a question for Professor Leuprecht concerning the use of racism by the Chinese Communist Party to further its foreign interference operations. Is it the case that the CCP's propaganda has a racial angle? In other words, does the CCP use race to convince those who are ethnically Chinese that they owe an allegiance to the motherland as a way to further their foreign interference operations here? Is it part of their toolkit in their foreign interference operations here in Canada?
A brief answer, if you could, please, Dr. Leuprecht. Thank you.
The simple answer is yes. And there are some terrific people who have written about this, to the extent to which the CCP systematically instrumentalizes racism, in particular to thwart policy action against it, such as foreign agent registries.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to Mr. Fragaskatos for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here tonight. Ms. Harth, if I could begin with you. In your organization's report, obviously there's a detailed narrative there of the allegations that are put forward. Can you go over the evidence again to what exactly is the report pointing to in terms of evidence that shows that these are in fact police stations, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. So again, everything is open source, online, can be verified. Why we call them police stations in the first place? Because the PRC authorities that set them up, which are in specifically 4 public security authorities from 4 local jurisdictions within China, they vary a bit in the name they use, but they all call them police linkage centers or overseas police service centers. So that's the wording they use, and obviously the fact that they have been set up by a police body within the PRC is why we adopted that language as well. Now, among the tasks that are listed, and these are listed continuously across sources, including in newspaper articles that appeared online from Chinese Communist Party media, include the so-called administrative tasks, consular tasks that we've listed, and which, by the way, obviously the Chinese authorities and even embassies across the world have confirmed exist. But they also include tasks such as monitoring, measuring the sentiments or opinions of the community. They include tasks such as resolutely cracking down on crime, so assisting those public security authorities back in China with cracking down on crime, which then again also leads to those persuasion to return operations where we have found direct evidence of the involvement of some of these stations in executing those operations.
Yeah, in asking the question, I'm not trying to cast doubt on what's been put forward. I just wanted to know further detail on the evidence that that's being used to put forward the conclusions that the organization has drawn. I know you elaborated a little bit on that in your testimony, but I just wanted to delve in a bit more. What other leading democracies has China established such centers in?
Basically all. So it includes all countries of the G7. Europe is very heavily targeted, which is not surprising, but we've seen, all over the world, but I would say the democracies are definitely bearing the brunt of these stations, of the presence of these stations.
And is this something unique to China's approach? Is Russia employing similar methods? Is Iran, for example, doing this as well?
So transnational repression is definitely being used by all authoritarian regimes and to a growing extent, which is another reason why we believe it's so important to, be very clear that this will not be accepted, because we do see countries learning from each other. Also smaller authoritarian countries are starting to learn from those efforts and copying. The scale on which the Chinese Communist Party is operating these is unparalleled, though, and we haven't seen any other country setting up, going to the extent of setting up overseas police service centers.
Thank you very much.
Professor Chantal, the approach of China, is the approach very unique? It's the same question for you.
Oh,
You're still muted, sir.
Désolé.
I apologize. Thank you for the question. I would say the same thing as Ms. Harth. It's not that Chinese is the only country that is accused of conducting such operations. But to my knowledge, China is perhaps currently the only power that would be involved in conducting systematic action within democratic societies in order to control their nationals in those countries. But as was said, in some countries like the United States, when there are protests, agents who are identified as being Chinese emissaries are present to physically intimidate protesters. And with all Chinese communities in these countries, well, China would be the country to be the most systematic in its approach. So I can't expand on this, but I think we need to connect this to a new type of influence that China is exerting, which we call sharp power, which is a multifaceted strategy that doesn't only focus on opening police stations, but that also seeks to use economic power as a lever to muzzle certain voices that are influential, or organizations like we saw with the NBA Association when someone from the league took a position in favor of Hong Kong, a player, and then the association had to retract and take a position in favor of China. So that's a strategy that is really multifaceted.
Chantal will now go to Mr. Trudel for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses tonight. I'd like to ask a short question to the three of you. Yes or no, do you think China is listening right now?
Probablement.
Probably. Mr. Lebrecht?
Je n'ai aucun doute.
I have no doubt, because it is what diplomats do to collect open sources, and our conversation tonight is public, and we have the second biggest diplomatic presence after the U.S., the China. So certainly there would be a Chinese diplomat taking notes tonight. Okay, Mr. Chantal? I have no knowledge regarding technology to attest to this, but this is not something to say is impossible. So, hello, Mr. Jinping, who must not be far, taking notes. So, Mr. Chantal, earlier you talked about sharp power versus soft power used by China before. Now, with Ms. Harth, we're talking about Chinese presence in hundreds of countries around the world. Canada is still a pretty marginal power in the world. Why would China be interested in Canada? Mr. Trudel, that's an important question. A former Prime Minister of Canada, Joe Clark, said in a book that Canada doesn't have much influence internationally because of its size, its conventional power, but it's because of its ties with the United States. Canada is also a member of the G7. We've seen how Canada has very effectively used the European Union when the two Michaels were arrested in China to have a very effective campaign to show to what point China was conducting hostage diplomacy. Canada, to date, has a strong voice internationally, despite perhaps a smaller weight. So China cares a lot about its reputation. Why? Because the idea of a Chinese threat that's more widespread in the West prevents China from projecting a positive image that would be different from the United States. Its leaders want to project China as a friendly presence. And so with this type of issue with Canada, we've seen it's affected China's image. So to conclude, we've seen how China has tried, for example, based on information, to prevent the election of the Conservative Party, which they see as more critical towards China, while trying to prevent the election of a majority government. We don't know for now whether that had a clear effect, but all of that is part of this strategy to undermine democracy using sharp power here in Canada, based on the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you very much, Mr. Chantal. Mr. Luprecht, I will turn to you now. In your opening statement, you said that Beijing's spying and interference pose an existential threat to Canada's democracy. That's a pretty weighty statement. Could you explain that, please? Yes, I'm concerned that the discussion we're having regarding interference efforts and the violation of Canadian sovereignty are very isolated, that we're looking just at issues in police stations or interference with some candidates, rather than looking at the whole scale of actions in gray zones and asymmetrical hybrid warfare conducted by China through diplomatic, economic, military, defense, cyber, social, and educational efforts, and so on. So we need to have this broader look at what China's trying to do, the way it is undermining the democracy we value in Canada. To follow up, I understand the big picture with international policy, but now we're finding out that they're interfering in Vancouver's municipal election, and then it hasn't been confirmed, but in Brossard, there's a municipal candidate who is alleged to have been elected thanks to people working for the Chinese Secret Service, sending messages through platforms, chat, Snapchat, or I'm not too sure. So why would China be interested in having representatives in cities? China invests in interfering in democratic institutions. So it's at a scale that seeks to have power and influence at all political levels, and to invest in politicians who then will be better known and then can run in other elections. It's a strategy that is well documented with Chinese efforts. Thank you.
We'll now go to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here and sharing this information with us. I also have just a couple questions I'd like to ask all three witnesses, if I could. First of all, you know, this is very front and center right now. The reports of the police stations is relatively recent. However, the idea that the Chinese government has exerted influence in Canada and has engaged in the transnational repression is not new. This is something that Chinese Canadians have been warning us about for a very long time, that they've been telling us, and that this is happening within our academic institutions, within our policy, our public spaces. So my question for you is why the increase now? I think I know the answer, but I'd love your perspectives on why there is this increased focus, but also the increased implications of the Chinese government's interference in Canada. But also, if you could touch on whether or not, how you feel Canada's response to date has been, and whether or not that has been a factor in why there may be a perceived or there may be an increase in Chinese interference. And perhaps I would start with you, Ms. Harth, if I could.
Yes, thank you for those questions. I think, unfortunately, you are right. None of this is new. This has been going on for decades. We've definitely seen an increase when it comes to transnational repression since Xi Jinping came to power, but this has been going on for a long time and will only keep growing. So why is there the attention now? I think a lot of activists and dissidents that have reported for long are very frustrated. Safeguard Defenders itself was a bit frustrated because we had reported on those operations before. I think the brazen violation of national sovereignty with the police stations is kind of what got, the attention. It's quite sensational. But again, it is but the tip of the iceberg of what's going on. In terms of responses, I think Canada, as any other democracy in the world, has for too long a time closed its eyes to everything that's going on, maybe hoping it would go away if we just didn't look at it. That has obviously only allowed these operations to grow and putting us today at increased risk. I think it's good that everything that's coming to the surface now is coming to the surface. It is painful. It's going to be hard, getting through this. But, it's important that this is out in the public and that the society can take stock of everything that's going on because, awareness is the first step to actually addressing the issue. So I hope we can move forward. And in that respect, I do have to say that when it comes to the police stations, the response we've seen from the RCMP, from what we can, gauge from media reports and so on, has definitely been among the best that we've seen in the world, in democracies across the world. Thank you.
Mr. Chantal, could I ask you to go next?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes.
Oui, oui. Est-ce que je...
Yes. Am I to speak?
Oui.
Yes. I think my answer would lead me to look at 3 levels. Since the arrival of Xi Jinping in power, he has clearly put an end to what China observed since Deng Xiaoping as being the low-profile approach internationally. So he thought that China's moment had come to call for a leadership role alongside the United States and even called for a new relationship among great powers. Obviously, the end of China's previous approach, not to say that China is invading countries in its neighborhood in Asia, but rather to say that the end of this policy and a more active role has led some powers to see a greater Chinese threat. And so Xi Jinping, in response, has tried to use strategies that resemble public diplomacy, but Chinese actions are secret. And to conclude, the world is in a new Cold War, even if some analysts don't use that term. Today, we have 2 models very clearly, a liberal democracy model with the United States and American allies in Western Europe and also Canada. And on the other hand, there's a model that is authoritarian or neo-totalitarian, according to some, which is put forward by China and Russia, for example. So at that point, we need to expect to see some aggressiveness in the approach used by powers like China or Russia regarding that strategy that we've talked about tonight.
Do you want to just give a little bit of time for Mr. Lubprecht as well, if I could?
I'll be very quick. I think what we have is a culmination of 35 years of efforts by China, and we also now have, I think, a critical mass of elite capture in this country as a result on which China is capitalizing. And I would say in response to date, I cannot share my colleagues' optimism with regards to the RCMP. Show me the last national security, foreign interference or espionage investigation that the RCMP completed to the point where we actually had a prosecution, successful conviction in this country. So I think China is able to, the Chinese regime operates with impunity, and Canada has not made any efforts to deter it, as we can see by the recent choice by Canada to stay out of, for instance, even something such as AUKUS.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. We'll now go to our second round, and we'll begin with Mr. Kimmich for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to give Safeguard Defenders credit because I think a lot of the reason we're all here is because of the reports you've been putting out most recently. November 2022, there was that update to the report. In it, it mentioned Ireland and Netherlands have directed that these police stations be closed. Is there any other government that has closed these stations?
I would have to go back. There are some others that gave an order to close. However, for example, the Czech Republic, to be honest, we don't believe that is, a full response. Ireland, for example, has not officially announced investigations, where the Netherlands has. And I think that's one of the reasons before I said that we do commend the response so far from the RCMP on the issue of the police stations, because they've been quite open about investigating, which I think is more important than just saying, oh, we'll close this specific address, given that, the organizations underneath will just keep running.
The report also mentioned there were 14 countries that launched investigations. Are there any new countries that have begun investigations?
There have been some more countries that have announced investigations. Not all of them are very open on the extent to which they are doing that.
And then on some of the information says that these are volunteer. The foreign PRC, United Front Works Department websites, says that these are volunteers who work there. But at some of the pictures provided by your organization and online show uniformed officers doing like joint patrols in Italy. So are these volunteers or are these employees?
So those police officers in Italy were part of the joint police patrols. That was an agreement that Italy made with the Ministry of Public Security, an agreement that is still in place, although the execution of it is suspended because of COVID, not because of the police stations. So those were officials from the police in China. They are not the people manning the stations. We're not sure at this point in time if the people linked to these stations are acting in a voluntary capacity or are hired. I mean, we've seen language of these people being hired by the public security authorities in China, but we have no evidence of payments being made. So that's an open question.
So these, in the Canadian case, do you have any information about these people? Are they Canadian citizens or permanent residents who are being hired or volunteering to work, or are these people coming from outside the country and working or volunteering for these police stations?
No, it's our impression so far all over the world that the vast majority of these people are regular residents in the country where these stations are operated. Again, the United Front link is important because one of the reasons they've been getting away with this with such impunity is because these people have been engaged in influence operations for a long time. So usually they're well established within those communities and have, ties. We see regular photo ops with, local politicians, academics, businessmen, and so on.
Does your organization support the creation of Foreign Agent Registry Act?
I guess we would support that. Do I think that is a solution to the issue? No. That might be a start, but let's be honest. These people are not going to register as foreign agents.
And they should. You'd support Foreign Agent Registry Act applies to all countries equally, not just one specific to the PRC.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Professor Leuprecht, through you, Mr. Chair, I wanted to ask, do you support the creation of Foreign Agent Registry Act?
I have called for that publicly and in writing repeatedly along with other measures. Yes.
I needed you to say it on the record, so thank you for doing that. I was going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you for some conjecture here because I consider you an expert on this. Is it possible that Canada's non-invitation to AUKUS is related to how much successful interference there has been in civic society in Canada?
That is difficult to gauge. It appears that this is more an elite process, on the one hand of Canada being left out of key conversations, and on the other hand, some Canadian elites having chosen not to participate in those conversations.
On a Foreign Agent Registry Act, in order to identify the persons and organizations who should be on there, how much outreach should we be doing to diaspora communities in Canada who are targeted by these organizations?
Well, I think we have some pretty effective models from both Australia and the United Kingdom on how we can effectively operationalize a Foreign Registry Act. I'm not sure why it takes us years of consultations. Yes, we need to make it commensurable with the Charter, unlike the UK and Australia, but I don't think this is all that difficult to do.
Professor Chantal,
Professor Chantal, I'd like to ask you, do you agree with creating a Foreign Agent Registry Act in Canada? I don't know if that's what will bring about a solution to the problem, but if it's identified as being useful, it would be very good. Now, if you can give me a few seconds to mention that the issue is a lot more complex with Chinese nationals who are supposed to be part of this strategy by China. There are people who can be forced, but there are also people who are Canadian citizens of Chinese background who may live here in Canada, or American citizens of Chinese background who, in one way or another, identify with continental China and can voluntarily participate in seeking to achieve the Communist Party's objectives. So in that way, it's much more difficult because it's a liberal democracy that's much more open and respectful of individual liberties.
Very much. We've been a little generous with time tonight. We do have a little bit of a pad leading up to the top of the hour, but from henceforth, make sure everybody gets a fair shot. We'll, after this round, start to hold you to your time, okay? Mr. Oliphant, for 5 minutes or a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses. You're here tonight as experts, and that is very important to us to get your testimony. This committee will most likely engage in writing a report following this this study. And when we get into that closed door in-camera session, we look at the testimony that you've given us, and that is how it gets into the report. I, for one, will always try to ensure it's substantiated testimony and that it is actually based in fact, not just opinion. And with that, I want to talk to Professor Luprecht and ask a few questions. In your testimony tonight, you said international organizations are being suborned by the PRC to the detriment of Canada's interests. Can you name those and exactly show us how that is happening?
Yes, one good example is the World Health Organization. Chinese influence and interference in the World Health Organization is publicly documented since 1953. Those of us who understand how the organization works knew from the beginning that intelligence coming out of the World Health Organization with regards to the pandemic should be taken with a grain of salt. And if we had done that, I think our countries would have reacted differently.
And if you have others, we would be happy to receive that in writing. You mentioned the balloons. That seemed to be a throwaway comment or rhetoric, or is there something that you wanted to add about balloons to this testimony, your expert opinion?
Well, you might have seen my opinion piece in the Globe and Mail on this. The balloons were effectively a test of the NORAD's response system to objects in our airspace. What better way to understand how we respond and the characteristics of our response than to send different objects of different sizes?
Or did you have proof of that?
Well, I would, if you look in for a testimony before the National Defense Committee and you ask some of the commanders involved with NORAD, I think you will get substantiation that this was a test of our system.
You say that Beijing invests heavily to make influential opinion leaders beholden to the PRC. Who, where, how much, when, and have they had a chance to defend themselves?
I think I provided some evidence here from Australia that is publicly known. There are other cases from other countries that I could provide to you, and I have first-hand experience as I provide in the testimony.
You say that Canadian academics have been offered thousands of dollars to co-publish. Do you know of authors who have accepted that money and have been influenced to publish?
I have. I will not name those individuals here publicly, but I would suggest that if you look at people who co-publish with people in China, that gives you at least somewhat of an indication of some of the individuals, and then look at their rather sympathetic views on China in this country.
and you say that the PRC pays off politicians. That is a very strong accusation. That is an illegal activity on both sides. Are you prepared to name them?
Well, I would have to say we have evidence in Canada of flows of money to political organizations through questionable channels and particular candidates, and these are patterns that are replicated in other allied countries.
I would actually like to know what politicians are being paid off. You say in the same way the PRC pays off politicians. That is illegal in Canada, to receive or to offer or to give. In 3 ways it's illegal. If you have evidence, have you taken it to the RCMP?
I would suggest to you that in my testimony I provide 2 open source cases from Australia.
No, I'm talking about Canada. This is a Canadian House of Commons committee. Is it something they do in Canada?
Well, if we had a federal police force that was effective at investigating this, I think we would see cases like this in this country.
So no, the answer you're giving me is no, you don't have evidence.
We have institutions that are
There are aspersions
that cannot follow through on their mandate for national security.
There are aspersions dotted all through your testimony to us that I would think would be very helpful to know exactly what the effect has been, the success at interference by the Chinese government in Canada. What legislation, what policies, what regulations, if they've invested this much money, where has it been successful? Could you give me some examples of where they've been successful in their heavy paying out politicians? Where has it been successful?
Well, as I name in my testimony, with regards to some resource development in this country, we know that China is not the only actor that invests in information campaigns with regards to resource development in one way or another in this country. And I also again provide evidence from Australia with regards to links that subsequently appeared that were proven so problematic that people opted out of public life.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. We'll now go to Monsieur Trudel for 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes, d'accord. On a quasiment eu 5 minutes, oui.
We nearly got 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lebrecht, we get the impression that Canada is letting everything through. It's been very obvious for a number of weeks. There have been balloons going over Canada and the United States, some that were taken down and others we don't really know what happened. There's electoral interference that's been discussed, direct interference in elections here in Canada, Chinese police stations that the RCMP has told us a few weeks ago that they weren't aware that there were Chinese police stations in Quebec. I asked a question to a member of the RCMP 3 weeks ago before it was out in the newspaper, and the RCMP didn't know. Either they were lying or they really didn't know. And that's very concerning. We're also talking about spies at Hydro-Quebec. They were working in development of electrical development. It's very important. It's critical for the coming years. So there was a spy there who was arrested. What we're hearing is unbelievable. It's worrying. What is Canada not doing? And on the other hand, what could Canada start doing now to put a stop to this so that it doesn't happen again? Two comments. The first would be a federal police that is able to concentrate its resources on a federal mandate. The RCMP currently uses 85% of its resources and efforts on provincial and territorial and local policing, and that is to the detriment of its federal mandate. Furthermore, Canada is the only G7 country that doesn't have a service for foreign collection. There's no human collection service. So we're about blind in one eye because we have CSIS activities that are very limited abroad. So, to find out what's happening in hostile countries in our own country, we need to understand what is happening abroad. And we don't have those measures in place currently. And it seems that no government in the last 30 years was willing to make such an investment.
I believe you are out of time, I'm afraid, sir. Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Harth, you spoke about the fact that well, this has been going on for a very long time, that there is an awareness now and that has come into the public eye. Do you think the value of trade with China has blinded countries like Canada to the interference that has been going on?
Yes, absolutely. And it continues to do so.
I guess the other thing, too, is when we look at how this is being how China, the government of China, is influencing Canada and influencing the other countries, can you talk a little bit about what that might look like in non-European, non-North American context? What does that look like in sub-Saharan Africa, for example?
Well, it depends on the country. It's not necessarily my expertise, but we see, obviously, they're using their economic weight or the promise of economic investments, infrastructure, and so on, to try and, let's say, co-opt certain governments. We see them particularly effective in countries where, that same government might have authoritarian streaks or, be very eager to remain in power. We see them corrupting, again, governments, very often in countries that are not exactly democratic or not stably democratic, and it's all towards the same aim. And we see them, especially over the past years, Xi Jinping has launched a couple of so-called global initiatives. We see them very heavily investing on the so-called global south and trying to, in a way, align that global south with its interests, with its design, new design for the future world order, which is radically different and alternative to the international rules-based order based on human rights, fundamental human rights as we know it.
So I guess the real answer then now is we see that this is happening all over the world. We see this is happening in multiple countries, not just with China, but with other countries as well. What are the lessons, the best case scenario, the best lessons learned from other countries? How are they responding to this appropriately?
You mean to the China threat? I don't think we've seen a complete, comprehensive response from any country so far. Obviously, I think the United States is the country that has woken up first to the threat. They're obviously also the prime enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. It's not hiding that. In that sense, I think it's important to see that when the PRC targets a certain country for influence operations, similarly to Russia, it's not only looking at influencing that particular country, it's only also trying to chip away at existing democratic alliances, defense alliances, for when, it plans to make its next move, for example, on Taiwan. And I think that's something very similar to what we have seen Russia do and still see Russia doing with, for example, its disinformation campaigns or by creating those kind of dependencies. It was energy dependencies with Europe. For Russia, we see the PRC heavily investing and quite openly talking about wanting to enhance, economic interdependence, dependency from other countries on its economy, all the while working to insulate its own economy from external shocks. So there's a couple of things going on, and I think we've only begun now, very late, to actually be aware of that issue, and it's high time. Look, this is not any individual country's individual issue. This is a big threat to the Democratic Alliance as a whole, to the international rules-based order. So we need to kind of coordinate on this and really start responding.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Jennis for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. In our Canadian debate about foreign interference, I would say that there have been two predominant views expressed. One has come from many in the government, which is to say that they view the purpose of foreign intervention as being to create chaos and undermine trust in institutions in every case, and therefore that we should avoid talking about foreign interference too much because the discussion of it undermines trust. On the other hand, my view would be that foreign interference is sometimes about undermining trust in institutions, but it's more fundamentally about trying to advance the interests of a foreign power through whatever means. That could involve weakening trust, but also electing more pliant candidates, stealing technology, breaking alliances, or stifling criticism. And my view is also that we need to talk about this problem in order to resolve it. That includes holding institutions accountable for their failures. I'd like to hear briefly from all of the witnesses, what do you think the purpose of foreign interference is? In other words, which of those two views do you more identify with? And should we be talking about it or not? Maybe Ms. Harth, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you. I think the aims is very often both. Maybe we see that, it's my impression that the Chinese Communist Party has mainly invested in the first place in trying to advance its interests, and other witnesses have said this has been going on for decades. They've been laying the foundations for a long time. At the same time, obviously, we see them trying to undermine on a global scale, really, the allure of democracies, trying to say democracies can't deliver, they can't work. So there's a bit of both going on. But I do agree with you that the more we talk about this problem publicly, raise awareness across society, the better to start tackling it.
Thank you. We'll go to the witnesses online in whichever order.
Je dirais que
I would say that China is doing something that all great powers do. That is to say, it is trying to modify international opinion towards its interests. But most Western great powers use public diplomacy, whereas China, in the logic of a Chinese strategist, China is trying to win without fighting. That is to say, uses much more subtle means, given what China is doing is not shared necessarily by a significant part of Western opinion. So this is an issue that should be heard, but I think that the West has a major deficit in addressing this. The debate around the Chinese threat in the West over the past few years has had to do with issues related to hard power or soft power. However, we've rarely talked about the sharp power of China, the capacity of China to infiltrate itself within societies that are hostile to it in the West and to try to modify public opinion.
Your comments, just because of limited time, we'll go to Professor Leuprecht.
I would say that sowing chaos and undermining trust is more a function of polarization and more closely associated with mis and disinformation than with foreign interference, although foreign interference can, of course, support it. But I think that's actually obfuscating the problem. Look at Australia. Australia reorganized its national intelligence community precisely because of its understanding of foreign interference as advancing the interests of a foreign power, and Australia perceiving itself as not having been postured adequately in its intelligence structure and posture. The United Kingdom has organized its community. In Canada, we have not. And I would say this is related to a misunderstanding of the objectives of foreign interference. A rereading of annual CSIS reports might be in order.
Thank you. And brief follow-up question to Professor Leuprecht. You talked about how our failures on this issue are affecting American security. We've seen with AUKUS where a lot of the functions of intelligence sharing are supposed to be happening through Five Eyes, now happening effectively through the Three Eyes. I wonder if you could just bluntly tell us, are we seen by allies as being more vulnerable and therefore less trustworthy? And do you think that's a contributing factor to us not being part of AUKUS?
I provide a link to a US-sourced intelligence assessment that now expresses precisely this concerns about Canada as a national security problem to the United States, and I believe a public inquiry in Canada peeling back the onion would reveal this to a point where I think even the current government would not have an interest in actually having this out in public.
Thank you. And any follow-up information from the witnesses, if they could be provided in writing.
Out of time,
Thank
sir.
you.
You're out of time. We will go now to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question will be for Mr. Chantal. Thank you for joining us from the University de Moncton in New Brunswick. university that may have a new name in a few weeks or months. Mr. Chantal, we heard tonight from other witnesses too and you that foreign interference isn't new. We've heard about this for years regarding China. Some seem to say that it's only since the election in 2015 that it's happened, but I don't think that's the case. So why are we seeing a rise in this topic currently? In your opinion, why do you think the public is much more inclined to listen? Is there something that should be done to demystify this, to explain that it's not new, and that the government is taking all of the necessary measures to ensure that we have the measures in place to prevent this from happening? I think, Mr. Cormier, that it's an important question, but it's related to a change in paradigm in the West since the election of Donald Trump in the United States. He broke with the idea that the emergence of China could be something beneficial and tried to impose sanctions. He changed the paradigm. And this is related also to the fact of what is perceived as aggression from Xi Jinping vis-à-vis Hong Kong, vis-à-vis Taiwan. And given the global ambitions with a set of initiatives globally, he has tried to shape global opinion in favor of China. So in that sense, it's related to the fact that he is seeking to inverse, as a result of the foreign policy that's perceived as aggressive, he's trying to inverse the negative trend in Western opinion towards China. Thank you. I know that we've also heard from some witnesses about trade. And as you know, in the Atlantic provinces, we trade a lot with China in terms of exports in fisheries. You must know this. How do we do to reconcile the two, to have a trade relationship with China while ensuring that we preserve democracy, while we prevent foreign interference at the highest level? Is there a balance that we can find between the two, in your opinion? Mr. Cormier, in my opinion, this is an extremely important question. My position on this is not the most popular because there are more and more voices calling for decoupling the Western economies from China's. I don't think that that strategy is in Canada's interest. Mr. Cormier, we need to be responsible, even if we have convictions. China is a great power on the Security Council. You can't do anything on climate change without cooperating with China. Regarding poverty in Africa, you need to collaborate with China, despite the lack of popularity of China and China's actions that aren't rational policies. I would propose that we take a step back. Yes, we have to deal with the challenge presented by China without necessarily cutting ties with China, because from my point of view, that would not be in the national interest for Canada. Great, thank you. My next question is for Ms. Harth. Ms. Harth, feel free to answer in English, but I found that your French was impeccable, especially on this International Day of Francophonie. If you would like to speak in French, that's no problem either. So regarding police stations, Ms. Harth, what was your process to explain to those listening, how did you discover the existence of these police stations, whether in Canada or elsewhere? What information did you receive to discover that these police stations existed here or elsewhere?
Apologies, I will respond in English just because it's easier, and I want to make sure that I'm very precise on this. We came across the police stations as we were tracking how exactly the Chinese authorities had managed to return, according to their own statements, to 230,000 individuals, all through clandestine means, between April 2021 and July 2022 alone. As we were tracking these operations, we came across 2 jurisdictions in particular, which are the ones mentioned in 110 overseas. And together with some, chatter among dissidents, activists on social media channels, in looking at these 2 jurisdictions, we came across statements both on their websites, so the websites of the public security authorities themselves, as well as confirmation of those reports in state and party media from the PRC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. We'll now go to our third round. We'll get into it a bit. Mr. Chong for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions from Madame Harth. First, do you think Interpol has lost its usefulness because of the PRC's use of it as part of their persuasion to return operations? And how do governments and law enforcement here in countries like Canada prevent the abuse of Interpol by the PRC?
Yes, the abuse of Interpol by the PRC and other authoritarian regimes is a big issue for that organization. I think democratic nations, need to step up to the plate again in international organizations such as Interpol, but also others. For too much time, we've kind of let countries such as the PRC get away with a lot, so we may need to think about alternative means of working. That includes, by the way, also, allow me to say, the United Nations Agent's Office on Drugs and Crime, which has a standing memorandum of understanding with the Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection, which is kind of the Chinese Communist Party internal police, and has appointed that organ, which is in charge of all these transnational policing operations, as the focal point for all work under that convention. So that is a big issue that we need to deal with urgently.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that some 11,000 people have been forced to return to China under these persuasion to return operations. Can you tell us how many from Canada you estimate have been persuaded to return? And then the second part of that question is, last fall, an indictment was unsealed in a Brooklyn, New York court that stated that the Chinese government from Toronto was trying to coerce persons in the United States to return to leave the United States, to go to Toronto for more intensive interrogations, rather than doing those more intensive interrogations on U.S. soil. Is the implication that Canada has become somewhat of a safe haven for these persuasion to return operations for this kind of foreign interference threat activities? When you read that kind of evidence that the U.S. Justice Department has outlined in the unsealed indictment?
We often see, it's very hard to look into individual operations. There's not a lot of evidence on individual operations. We do have some larger numbers that are put out there by the PRC authorities, but we do see the use of third countries happening not only with Canada, but also in other places. I would say, though, it might be a very good indication that, the actions that the U.S. authorities have been putting in place in a cross-departmental fashion over the past 2-3 years are effective, at least to the extent of maybe, scaring them a bit more, and so trying to conduct those operations on foreign soil where that attention was just not as present. When it comes to individual operations, so we have big numbers. It's very hard to find those individual cases. I can tell you that anecdotal evidence, again, open source, indicate that, at least 3 persuasion to return operations have taken place on Canadian soil. There's likely many more, but those are the numbers that we can get from the evidence. Just to be clear, the PRC authorities state they conduct these operations in over 120 countries around the world. So that is virtually every single country in the world, be there a police station or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong. We'll now go to Mr. Asasi for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start off with Mr. Leprecht. Mr. Leprecht, listening to what you had to say, I think you were insinuating that the Americans are very disappointed that Canada is not vigilant enough. Am I correct in that assumption?
Of course, we want to conduct our own and sovereign foreign policy, but yes, I think we can see concerns on national security, intelligence, and defense matters across a spectrum, including by the U.S. ambassador.
Okay. Now, with respect to these balloons that you're very much concerned about, did you see much of a divergence in the manner in which the Americans dealt with it and how Canadians dealt with it?
Well, as I pointed out in my op-ed in the Globe, in the U.S., the Secretary of State very clearly called out the violation of international law and unacceptable conduct. In Canada, we called in the Chinese ambassador, and that was everything that we heard about it, and the official word.
But in terms of actions, you would agree that we both dealt with them identically. Is that correct?
Well, I think I lay out considerable differences in the way we dealt with them in the two countries publicly.
No, we both used NORAD and we shot them down. Is that not correct?
The public communication was very different in the two countries by the two governments.
So that's the first issue. With respect to these police stations, have you seen a huge divergence between how Canadians have dealt with it and Americans?
There's certainly a more robust capacity in the United States to investigate such matters.
But in terms of how the two countries have reacted to these so far, have you seen a divergence?
Well, we actually see actual investigations in the United States and unsealed indictments.
Are you saying that there aren't investigations here in Canada?
Well, I would.
Is that what you're suggesting?
I would like to see some indictments. We've been
Well,
investigating
no.
the
Seeing
Winnipeg
is
lab
one
for
thing.
3.5
Are
years.
you suggesting that there aren't investigations going on in Canada?
We can have investigations for years, it seems, in this country, and
No,
never seem to
but
lead
you
anything
just
to a
implied
successful
that we
conclusion.
do not have investigations here in Canada. Do you know that to be true?
Well, investigations are only useful if we can actually prosecute.
No. You suggested that there are no investigations going on here.
That is not what I suggested, because the
it is what you
implied.
implied. It is absolutely. You said in America they're investigating, which implies that we're not investigating these cases.
We have evidence of indictments in the United States. I would like to see evidence of indictments in Canada and successful prosecution.
That's very different. No.
No.
Now you're going from investigations to indictments. That's again. I really have to say this is very frustrating. This is a very serious issue, and we want to deal with this in a very serious manner. So insinuations don't really help the members of this committee. And is it your assertion, sir, that the U.S. entered into the agreement with the Australians and the Brits on the submarines because they had lost faith in Canada?
The object of criminal intelligence is to lead to successful prosecution. I would like to see
Mr. Leprecht, in response to Mr. Genis's question, he said, do you think that the Americans are concerned, and is that part of the reason why we're not part of that AUKUS agreement? And you referred to some report that you had seen which suggested that there may have been some concerns, but that had nothing to do with AUKUS, did it?
It appears that the government does not seem too concerned about being left out of office.
Thank you. So you essentially answered that question as well. You said it appears. Thank you for that. Now, if I could go to Ms. Hart. Thank you very much for your testimony. We were talking about the reaction of various countries to these police service stations. And I think two countries stood out. I think it was Ireland and another country. In your opinion, what is the right way to react to these secret police stations?
The first one is obviously what a lot of countries have done, is calling the fact that these are illegal out publicly and immediately. That is something that Canada has done. The second is to launch investigations, which may take some time. This is, again, what is happening in Canada and in a growing number of democratic nations around the world. As was pointed out earlier, some have ordered the closure of these stations, while again, in terms of public messaging, we think that is very valuable. That does not solve the actual issue. Now, in terms of policy recommendations beyond the ongoing investigations is one, look beyond the addresses, right? This is not just about a single address. This is about the networks of individuals and organizations running these and similar organizations running similar operations, even if there's not officially a police station. So it is crucial that all investigations really go into the wider United Front activities, both to counter transnational repression, but also to counter those other influence operations. We really call on allied democracies to face this common threat together. This is pretty new for most countries, so we need a coordinated framework, for example, to start from the G7 to define transnational repression, share intelligence, and best counter practices, and even include the potential adoption, because the issue of indictments and prosecution was pointed out. That is an issue that, for example, also the US authorities are dealing with. Just this week, a bipartisan proposal for a legislative framework on transnational repression was put forward to exactly adopt the kind of criminal clauses and legal framework that may be necessary to counter that repression. So these are some of the steps to be taken. So, apologies.
Thank you, Ms. Harth. I know it's difficult to hold answers because there's so much information brimming up inside. We have a little bit of extra time in the second panel, so we will conclude this round with first Mr. Trudel for 2.5 minutes and then Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Trudel, it's yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci encore à tous les
Thank you once again to all of the witnesses. It's extremely interesting. I'll ask the same question to Mr. Luprecht and Mr. Chantal. We saw a sad event over the past 2-3 weeks. The government is playing for time while everyone in Canada, parliamentarians, journalists, opinion makers are asking for the government to declare a public inquiry to get to the bottom of things. Do you think, both of you, do you think that the government is playing for time by naming a special rapporteur who is close to the government and close to China? Do you think that could be a public investigation?
Il me semble que le gouvernement aurait...
It seems the government could have chosen to have a rapporteur and agree before, well, could have had an agreement among all parties in Parliament to ensure that there's the impartiality of that rapporteur that would be accepted by everyone, but the government decided not to proceed in that way, and it's similar for the NSI-COP study. The government could say that NSI-COP could make its study to give it not to the executive but to Parliament and NSI-COP to decide on the scale of it. Well, I think the government has the means at its disposal to ensure impartiality aside from a public inquiry. Mr. Chantal, same question. I think it's possible that the government is trying to gain some time, but it's not guaranteed that if a public inquiry was struck, that it would lead to the right result. I think we need to give time to the relevant authorities here in Canada who must be able to do their work, and when the time comes, we can decide what additional decision could be made. And Canada finds itself under American pressure because the Americans are involved in a direct competition with China. There's a danger here. We've seen it in the past with Iraq in 2003. With Colin Powell, the Americans went to the UN and said there were weapons of mass destruction, and then we realized there weren't. And so there's a tendency to exaggerate the Chinese threat, to not give authorities the time to act. Yes, the threat exists, but perhaps we need to be careful to make the right decisions. The hysteria around China will not help us to take on the challenge appropriately. Thank you.
Mr. Trudel, and now to Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Harth, I just wanted to dig in a little bit more about what our next steps should be and give you a little bit more time there. Before I do, though, I wanted to point out, and I think it's important to get on the record, that when we hear the phrase police stations or overseas Chinese police stations, that perhaps that's a misnomer. That these are, I think you brought that up. It's not an address. It's not a location. It is a bigger thing. They've been described to me as clandestine hubs for foreign influence activities, as these locations should not be understood within conventional understanding of policing activities. You know, you spoke about the registry not being perhaps a useful mechanism. You spoke about the need for community outreach, the adoption of a framework. Any other things that this committee needs to hear from you on what we should be doing next?
Thank you for that question. I actually had one last initial recommendation listed, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to point out. Let me just point out, I don't want to say that the registry might not be useful. I just think that as a standalone, solution, it's not a solution, right? It must be part of a wider framework of options. My last recommendation would actually be, aside from those already said, that, together with allies, and that also goes back a bit to the questions asked by Mr. Chong on, international institutions, is that Canada, you have a Magnitsky Human Rights Act that together with allies, you should actually consider sanctions on the PRC institutions and officials responsible for these transnational repression efforts, starting from that Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection and the Ministry for Public Security, recalling that these two institutions not only are responsible for these transnational repression and illegal policing activities on foreign soil, but also for crimes against humanity and even genocide inside China. So it's high time that we start holding these people, these individuals and institutions to account, and definitely interrupt all cooperations with them, be it in international institutions or at a bilateral level.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. That brings us to the end of our first panel, but I'd like to thank our witnesses, Dr. Chantel, Dr. Lupreck, and Ms. Harth. You've been very generous with your time late into the evening, and we appreciate that very much. We will now suspend for 5 minutes while we get the next panel ready to go. Panelists for our second round here. Unfortunately, Mr. Juno Katsuya was unable to make our session tonight. There was a family issue that he had to deal with, and we can certainly understand that. But we are joined by Gloria Fung, President, Canada-Hong Kong Link by video conference, and Henry Chan, co-director of the Saskatchewan Stands with Hong Kong. We'll begin with 5-minute statements or less by each of our guests. Ms. Fung, given the testing we were doing on your microphone, we'll ask you to use your big voice, okay, so that everybody can hear you.
Thank you.
All right. There you go. 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting me to testify before the committee. I'm Gloria Fung, President of Canada-Hong Kong Link, a community organization established 25 years ago to promote democracy, the rule of law, freedom, and human rights in Hong Kong, as well as to encourage the full participation of Canadians of Hong Kong origin in all aspects of Canadian society. For decades, civil society organizations have reported foreign agents' intimidation of Canadians and meddling in our politics. Unfortunately, our government has not responded to these concerns. Therefore, a comprehensive network of pro-CCP United Front organization has operated virtually unchecked, threatening our freedom of expression, national security, and democracy. The Chinese police stations are a collaborative effort of United Front organizations and the Public Safety Bureau of China, enabling the CCP to stretch its arms far and wide. They repress Asian diaspora communities. They collect civil intelligence and harass and intimidate Canadians critical of Beijing's policies. As a pro-democracy organizer, I have received threatening calls here warning me to stop meddling into Hong Kong's affairs or face serious consequences. There have been numerous unsuccessful attempts to hack into my emails. When I was in Hong Kong speaking against the draconian extradition bill, there were attempts to track me down and likely abduct me. In 2019, CCP proxies organized counter-protests to jeopardize Canadians' freedom of expression in many cities. Clearly, diaspora community members are victims of foreign harassment and intimidation. But above all, we are appalled by CCP proxies meddling in elections at all levels of government by spreading disinformation, manipulating party nominations, and secretly funding candidates. Therefore, the Canadian Coalition for a Foreign Influence Registry, comprising 33 multicultural organizations, urges the passage of a Foreign Influence Registry Act with criminal code application before Parliament's summer recess. This registry is supported by 88% of Canadians surveyed in two recent Nanos national polls. It would apply to individuals and entities working on behalf of any foreign country, not just China, people of every ethnic background, not just Chinese Canadians. It would place no restriction on legal cooperation or exchanges with foreign governments, but it would be a legislative tool to hold foreign agents accountable. The transparency it would provide is sorely lacking now. There's no connection between the registry and anti-Chinese racism. The cloud of suspicion hanging over our community is not created by talk of a registry, but by the covert actions of benign foreign agents. We need to know who they are, differentiating them from virtually all Chinese Canadians. Urgent action is needed to address this threat to Canadian society. There should be an independent public inquiry. CSIS and the RCMP need enhanced capacity in monitor information and conduct investigations in Mandarin, Cantonese, and Fujianese. Finally, Chinese diplomats attached to the Ministry of State Security or United Front Work Department should be expelled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fung. We'll now turn to Mr. Chan for 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the invitation to appear before you to speak on a matter of great gravity. It has always been known that the United Front workforce have been operating in Canada to intimidate and harass dissenters. Their works also include repatriating Chinese nationals for corruption charges. The same objective was true in 2019 when the Hong Kong SAR government introduced the extradition bill to extradite Hong Kongers and Chinese nationals for corruption and political charges. Mr. Chair, 4 years ago, Hong Kongers fought with their lives to defend themselves from such arbitrary action from the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese police station is an extended arm that intrudes on Canadian sovereignty. It undermines our government, our law enforcement, and our democratic institution. The police station are extension of the United Front, and by ousting such operation, it paints a picture in the minds of Canadians of just how far the CCP will go to assert its influence on foreign soil. Mr. Chair, the CCP is testing our resolve, and we must take these threats very seriously. Around the community, I have been collecting testimonies from people who have experienced firsthand the brutal nature of the communist regime. There was one gentleman whom I speak to who left China after constant harassment from the regime because he merely said a few words against the regime and was recorded by party members. His wife urged him to leave China, and then they settled in Saskatchewan. However, constant phone call bombardment and threats made against his extended family in China persuaded him to return. He was only allowed to come back to Canada after selling off most of his assets and handing a significant portion to the government. He was lucky only to lose money. And we often hear people who are persuaded to return and they disappear from the face of the earth. Mr. Chair, we're here today not only to tell you that there are real people who are in danger of the extended arm of the CCP, but to call for concrete and meaningful action. Since the founding of Saskatchewan Stands with Hong Kong in 2019, we have been calling for a government to establish a foreign agent registry to expose those working on behalf of Malay regimes. It is not the moon we're asking for. The U.S. passed it in 1938, Australia in 2018, and the UK has a government bill in session. In 2020, we organized petition 2835 to call for a foreign agent registry. Last November, we again organized petition E4172 to call for action to deal with foreign interference and for the immediate shutdown of the Chinese police station. Before we were even able to coordinate the petition, Ireland and the Netherlands already ordered the immediate shutdown of such operation. On this, our government have been timid and slow. There are a lot of Canadians that care about this issue, and I'm one who does. And I intend to share my real views with you this evening. The news of foreign interference and meddling in our election is very concerning. In the community, I've already been hearing who is running our government. Many came to Canada because their country was no longer safe. Now, seeing the overreach of regimes into our democracy is deeply troubling. The public trust has already been shaken. Therefore, there must be total clarity and sunlight as to what is happening and why it was allowed to happen. My observations are that most of our policy dealing with regimes that have been passively responsive. I firmly believe that in developing our Canada-China policy, we must bear in mind three things. Number one, China does not respect weakness. Number two, the CCP cannot be trusted. It's a regime that had been known to roll back on its own commitment. And number three, we're dealing with a regime that every day attempts to find cracks in our democracy, and we must suspect that they're looking for ways to undermine our stability. If we keep these things in mind, I believe we can have a better chance of a China policy that is proactive rather than reactive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chan. We'll now go to our first round of questioning, and we'll begin with Mr. Chong for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for coming today to talk about foreign interference and these illegal police stations. My first question is to both witnesses. Would you say that the Chinese community is the biggest victim of the PRC's foreign interference threat activities, whether it be the establishment of these illegal police stations or the PRC organizing counter-protests to pro-Hong Kong democracy activists or other meddling in our democracy? Maybe to Madame Fung first.
Thank you very much for your question. I fully agree that the Chinese Canadian community is, the biggest victim of the Chinese foreign interference. Because over the past decades, I have seen our community being infiltrated, manipulated, and many of our community members who are outspoken about the Beijing policies have been cracked down by some of these, secret police or even the United Front organizations in peaceful rallies and also other kind of public forums. And it's exactly, if ever there's a cloud of suspicion being created by, the recent discussion of the meddling into elections by the Chinese embassy or maybe its proxies in Canada, eventually it's, the Chinese Canadian who are going to suffer because there will be a cloud of suspicion. However, we have to be very clear about who have created this cloud of suspicion. It's not the talk or the suggestion of the passage of a foreign influence registry, but rather the actions, the infiltration, the meddling into election by many of these proxies that have created this cloud of suspicion. And therefore, even in terms of police station, the mainland Chinese by far are, the biggest victim of this operation. I have reached out to different mainland Chinese pro-democracy groups, and I have interviewed with a number of people who are actively involved in the anti-CCP or pro-democracy movement in Canada.
Well, thank you. I'd like to hear Mr. Chan respond to this question.
Okay.
Whether it is not the Chinese community that is the biggest victim of the PRC's foreign interference operations.
Yes, I do think in terms of CCP interference, the Chinese people are the first one that they want to attack, especially with the United Front workforce. It is basically towards the Chinese people.
I'd like to ask a very personal question to both of you. I'm a Canadian of Chinese descent. I was born in 1971 to a Chinese immigrant father who came here from Hong Kong. And I was born in a country where non-whites made up a very small percentage of our country's population, and where attitudes were substantially different then than they are today. In a country which had only recently done away with its whites-only immigration policy. So I know firsthand what it's like to be the target of anti-Asian racism. But I find it beyond the pale when I hear those when I hear those out in the public debate suggest that by raising questions about Beijing's foreign interference here in Canada, by advocating for a foreign agents registry, that we somehow are responsible for fomenting anti-Asian racism in Canada. I find it beyond the pale that people would suggest that. I think we have to do both. I think we have to both fight anti-Asian racism and discrimination, at the same time take seriously to counter Beijing's very real threats to our democracy, because to do one or not the other is either to abandon our fellow citizens of Asian descent to racism, or alternatively, to allow Beijing to continue to interfere in our democracy. I wonder if you both feel the same way.
Do you want? I could go first. I do feel the same.
We'll ask for very short reactions, please.
Yes, I feel the same way. We'll start at that, and then I think other witnesses can talk.
Madame Pham, go ahead.
I agree with your sentiment. I think some people have been amplifying this anti-Chinese racism. They aim to create fear and division. Actually, there's no evidence that there's a direct link between the passage of the foreign influence registry and the anti-Chinese racism. So, but to the contrary, it is a legislation protecting diaspora community members from foreign threats and intimidation.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Oliphant for 6 minutes or less.
I'm just going to let Mr. Chan respond if he would like to a little bit further from Mr. Chong's question. You didn't get really a chance. If you want to elaborate a little bit, I think that'd be important.
Yeah, on that question, I think I'm guessing you're talking about establishing a foreign agent registry would contribute to anti-Asian racism. And I think that it's actually a policy that would protect Canadian in the diaspora community because it targets those regimes which every day attempts to undermine our democratic rights. And then I think also we must recognize that by revealing people who are receiving funding or receiving support from foreign regimes, that allows for transparency. And transparency and accountability have been a long-standing policy in many democratic communities.
Continue a little bit in that vein. Nobody believes China's assertions that their police activities were legal or appropriate. The RCMP, I believe, has acted appropriately, and we have managed to change it. But I want to discern how much of the intimidation that you have either experienced, and both of you yourself, or heard second or third hand from others is related to those police stations, or are we getting a false sense of security by their removal and other activities will continue because they weren't the only source or even a primary source of that regime's activity?
Well, maybe I can answer first. I personally have direct experience of being intimidated and harassed. Actually, in Canada, I have, from time to time, received threatening calls. And at the same time, there have been attempts to hack into my email. Every time when we come to important days like July 1st or October 1st, there will be emails containing, files, tempting me to open it so that they can hack into my computer. But the most serious case is the time when I was back to Hong Kong. After I've spoken at the international press conference, calling upon international community to support Hong Kong people in the fight against the anti-extradition bill, I received email pretending themselves to be from mainland China and need my urgent help. I fully understand that this is an attempt to track me down and possibly to abduct me. So I have to, during my time in Hong Kong, I had to ask all my friends to accompany me back to the hotel every time when I finished my meeting. So, this is my personal experience. Maybe at other time, I can also share cases of other people, particularly the mainland Chinese activists here, about their experience of being intimidated and harassed.
Mr. Chan.
I do, on whether they are from the police station, I think it is very hard to say, as the previous witness has said. And a lot of times we do see that these harassment and intimidation, they're not only about the police station and rather a larger organization of the Chinese United Front Work Department that coordinates these kind of things on foreign soil. And I think sometimes they're not even from the same place where it is conducted. So they could be threatening your family elsewhere, and that doesn't have to be done on Canadian soil. That can be done back in.
Tell me what the nature of the threats are and whether or not you've reported them to the police.
I have not received those threats myself, but what I've heard from other people, including the person that I spoke about, is that those threats are like this. So they would follow their family, their extended family or whatever, and they would take pictures of them and send it to them and tell them to return. So their objective is to get them to return to China or wherever their homeland is. And they would take pictures of their extended family and send it to them in a way that is threatening them to return. And I think most of the time they're saying that if you don't do this, then this would happen to your family.
Do you know if they reported it to the police so there could be a forensic trail? And I'll ask Ms. Fung that as well, because it's I get threatening emails regularly, and I get phishing expeditions all the time on trying to get me to open things, but I've never felt threatened. But people are feeling threatened, and so have they reported them to the police, and have they been actually able to find out where they're from?
Yes, I have reported my case to RCMP because I believe this is not just about people, doing illegal threats in Canada. But unfortunately, the very first time when I report, the counter protests as well as my own personal experience to them, they said that, this is concerning foreign interference. So you may have to approach Ottawa to get help from them. So it was not until last year when the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team of RCMP was formed that they really started to take it seriously. So very recently, I had the chance to have a long talk with Ontario officers of the same team, and presented my experience as well as other people's experience of them, and at the same time providing evidence of such intimidation and harassment. So
Ms.
they
Fung,
are not
I'm sorry,
following up.
we'll have to intercept this at this moment because we do have to move on to our next questioner, which is Mr. Trudel for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses once again. It's very interesting. Ms. Fung, you've talked about your personal experience, that you've experienced intimidation. Mr. Chan, you say no. In the report, that you personally haven't experienced intimidation. In Safeguard Defenders report, Ms. Harth is here tonight. 110 overseas Chinese transnational policing gone wild. It said that the People's Republic of China, in an anti-corruption campaign, says it has convinced 230,000 citizens in the world to return to the People's Republic of China to face the judicial system between 2021 and 2022. That's a huge number, 230,000. I'm asking the question to both of you, Mr. Chan and Ms. Fung. And your organization, do you have people you know that you can tell their story of people who were here, who were persuaded to return to China, and how was it done? Threads, emails? Can you tell us more about that?
The one that I just talked about in the testimony, he was actually, when the threats were conducted, he was in Saskatchewan. And he was later, he later actually went back to China to sell off most of his assets. And after he sold off most of the assets, he said that he had to give a significant portion to the government before he was allowed to leave the country again. So that's what we're seeing. These are the kind of things that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the harassment and also coercion for dissidents to return back to China has been a collaborative effort by both the Public Safety Department or Public Safety Bureau of China and the United Front organizations in Canada. I cite you an example. One of the mainland Chinese dissidents that I talked to, he has been under constant surveillance by CCP agents on Canadian soil. His family member has been shown photos of this dissident's family picture and also showing him having dinner with his family in Toronto And he was totally shocked about this because he thought that he had come to a safe and free society. He didn't know that he is still under surveillance in Canada. So he asked me, he said, why is it that our government hasn't done anything to protect us from the Chinese Communist Party? And actually, eventually, because he refused to self-censor himself, his brother actually got laid off. And then the parents of his wife, his in-laws, were put in jail. So it shows the severity of this kind of coercion and also, threats, intimidation, and harassment of people in Canada.
Vous dites, c'est intéressant.
Interesting, Ms. Fang, you say that the government didn't intervene. But in this specific case, how do you think the government could have intervened to prevent that, to prevent people being sent there?
I think for a very long time, Canadians don't really know where to seek help whenever they have been confronted with this kind of foreign government threats, harassment, and intimidation. I still remember, sometime early last year, we tried to find a number that we get in touch with, a hotline or maybe other ways of, sharing the story with RCMP and police. Now, police definitely won't take care of this kind of foreign interference cases. But still, for RCMP, I think quite often, previously, they are very slow in responding. And quite often, we are asked to provide evidence. But we all understand that it's really difficult for people involved in this kind of foreign threats and intimidation to provide a very concrete evidence, either than their family members were being shown the photos and they also receive probably phone calls like myself. But then Rogers and Bell refused to provide the phone list to us. So there's no evidence we can produce.
C'est intéressant.
Interesting. Just to take a step back, I was talking about 230,000 in the world who had been sent back to China. In your respective organizations, you have numbers regarding, aside from the personal stories you've recounted, can you say there were 500 people we know in our organization who were sent back to China, 1,000, 350? Do you have any numbers you can give us?
Answer, please.
I think for us in Saskatchewan, one of the things is there's not that many where I live. There's not that many Chinese people, and even so, we've seen we've seen cases. I would say I've talked to at least 2 or 3 that have these kind of things, and this one was the most compelling. And that's why I decided to talk about it today. And do you mind if I just take a stab at your previous
Mr. Chan, no,
question?
perhaps you can incorporate your comments in the answer to another question,
Okay.
because it is time to go to
Okay.
Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes or less.
Yes. I've been working mostly with Hong Konger Canadians within our
I'm sorry,
community.
ma'am. No. We're going to go to Ms. McPherson now.
Okay.
Okay? All right. There we go.
Sure.
Well, it's very nice to know that our witnesses have so much to share with us. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. I mean, really what I'd like to hear from is some more information about some of the things that I've heard from you, Ms. Wong, on the RCMP. But before I do that, Mr. Chan, please, by all means, go ahead and take the stab at the answer.
I think what I wanted to say about the previous question is that you were asking about whether the RCMP can do anything. And the thing is, we're here to tell you that there are no mechanism to effectively counter these kind of threats. That's why we're asking for FARA as the first step to counter foreign interference. And there is probably other legislative tools that we can use, but that is the first step for us to do.
Ms.
My
Fang,
answer to
please go
your
ahead.
question is, there's very strong resonance. I think the very first step that the government can take is to pass the Foreign Influence Registry so as to provide a legislative tool for RCMP to hold individuals and entities with a working relationship with a foreign regime accountable. I've been told by RCMP officers that the law does not with them. They, as compared to other countries, it seems that we have very limited legislative tools for our enforcement department to work with. So, and that is why it is so important for us to pass the FERA Act as soon as possible. And then secondly, there should also be other measures to be considered by our government to cover foreign interference in other aspects of society. And third, I think the RCMP also need to be provided with more resources to enhance the capacity in investigation. But more importantly, I think they also need to enhance their understanding of benign foreign interference. Because I think in general, not only RCMP, but also many of our politicians or bureaucrats, we have very little knowledge about how foreign interference operates and how can we detect it? How can we come up with an effective strategy to combat it? So all these really takes a collaborative effort of the enforcement department and the community to enhance the exchange between the two and also to restore public trust in our enforcement department.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fung. I have a quick just clarification question for you, perhaps. You are raising that the registry is a tool that could then be used by the RCMP. It is an important step in your opinion. One of the witnesses that we had testifying previously made a mention of the fact that sort of the bad actors aren't going to put themselves on the registry, that the registry would have limited ability to sort of hold certain members to account. What would you say about that? How would you respond to that?
It is of utmost importance for us to, attach criminal codes to the future foreign influence registry, because without the criminal codes, it's almost like a tiger without any teeth. We cannot, oblige these individuals and entities working for a foreign government to register themselves with us. Let us take the Australian model as an example. As soon as the Australian Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme has been passed in 2018, many bureaucrats and also elected members actually resign. And we all know the reason why. So I think it really serves as a very effective measure to force people who are truly agents to come forward and register with the government. And if they do not comply to this requirement, they will be subject to imprisonment or maybe a very heavy fine. So this is something for our government to consider.
Thank you very much. Well, and one of the other things you talked about with regards to the RCMP, you talked about the need for the RCMP to have more resources, to be able to do their work, more education and whatnot. We had heard from other people on this issue that the outreach to the community was really insufficient. That in fact, you mentioned it even today, that you contact one branch of the RCMP and they say they can't help you and they send you somewhere else. We heard that in previous testimony, that the interaction between local police, city police perhaps, the RCMP and CSIS were not very well articulated. Folks that were impacted didn't know which way to go to. They were passed around. It was not very, very clear. That's your experience, I understand. How could we fix that?
Well, I think RCMP need to do more community outreach initiatives. Number one, to build trust between enforcement department and the community, and also to conduct public education so that they know how to protect themselves, right? How to make use of all the existing, help provided by our enforcement department to to protect themselves from foreign interference, threats, and intimidation. And at the same time, this is also a very good opportunity for RCMP to get input from the community as how they can better improve their existing services. Say, for instance, there wasn't a hotline, central hotline before, but I know that now it is in place. So this is a step forward, but it's still not enough.
All right, Ms. Fung, we'll have to again. I'm sorry, I know everybody's just so full of information, but maybe you can work out some more of these points in some of the answers to your questions from Mr. Seaback, who's up now for 5 minutes or less.
Great. In the report by Safeguard Defenders, 110 overseas, I want to read this section and ask you if you both agree with this. Overseas hometown associations, while often providing genuine services to the community, have by now become overwhelmingly co-opted by the CCP's United Front organizations, which seek to increasingly control the Chinese diaspora. Just if you could quickly both answer, do you agree with that assessment in the report?
Absolutely. I agree.
Yes, I do as well. And
Great.
I think, can I just give an example? I think in the past there had been, in those organization, other dialect that's spoken, and now it's just Mandarin.
So my next question to lead off of that is, would you consider these police stations to enhance the ability of the United Front to, I'm going to use some of your words from today, harass and intimidate the Chinese diaspora here in Canada?
I agree. I think for a lot of community members, the existence of police station on Canadian soil is really appalling to them. Just like what I have mentioned.
And intimidating?
What I quoted. Yeah, very intimidating. Yeah. Because they don't feel safe anymore with this kind of CCP-operated police station on Canadian soils. And that's why government need to take immediate action to stop the operations of these police stations, just like other European countries have already done so.
Jan?
Yeah, I think not only that there are some questionable behaviors, but also just the effect, the terror that paints on people's mind. Yes, and I think it fears off other freedoms. And I think the freedom from fear is perhaps the most important. Once you have fear, that then other freedoms are implemented.
So I'm going to keep sort of building on this. We hear about, and you've used this phrase, persuaded to return. I'm going to suggest a more accurate phrase would be coerced to return. First of all, would you agree with that? And secondly, do you think that, again, these police stations enhance the ability of coercive return?
Yes, but because they are threatening their family, and threatening your family, there's really nothing that you can do to save them. They're so far away, and then you're here, and the only thing is to comply with what they want.
I think our government has not done enough to stop this kind of foreign government's operation on Canadian soil. Our RCMP need to step up their action to hold these foreign agents, foreign police, and also people from the United Front organizations that have broken the law to jeopardize other Canadians' fundamental rights accountable. And for people who are from abroad, they should be expelled right away. And that should also include the diplomats that are attached to the Ministry of State Security and also the United Front Work Department. I think we have been too lenient towards this kind of malign influence in the name of diplomats.
I absolutely agree. Mr. Chan, in your opening statement, you said that the government's response to these police stations was too timid and too slow. And I think you have about 45 seconds, so I'm going to let you expand upon that.
Yes, I like for anybody, and I think a lot of you would agree with me, it looks like it is against international law and Canadian law. And before we were even able to coordinate the petition, which was presented this morning, the Netherlands and Sweden already, I think Netherlands and I think it was Sweden, already shut them down. And we were still investigating, and I think it's still investigating right now.
That's your time, Mr. Seebeck. Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes or less.
Okay. Thank you for coming to our committee meeting, and I know it's late, but I'm very thankful that you are both here with us today. A recent CBC article references Mr. Juno Katsuya. He was the witness that was supposed to come, but unfortunately had pressing family matters. It is about the intelligence reports that suggest the criminal triads Beijing used to intimidate pro-democracy demonstrators in Hong Kong were also present in Canada since 1998. How far back have you heard about the tactics of intimidation and political influence happening in Canada against the Chinese community? Mr. Chan and then Ms. Fung?
Well, for me, because I've only been in Canada since 2008. I can't speak that far back. But from my research, I've been seeing the CSIS report, even back to the late 90s. It's been warning about foreign interference. And I'll probably let other witnesses speak on this issue.
Yeah. Intimidation and harassment operated by CCP has been occurring for decades. I came to Canada in 1989, right after the Tiananmen massacre, and ever since then, I continued to get myself involved here in the pro-democracy movement, and I always participate in rallies and marches, and every time. Dated back to 1990 already. Every time when we stage our peaceful demonstration, maybe in front of the Chinese consulate, there would be people, taking a very close shot, taking photos of us, from a very close distance. This is very intimidating because they are actually sending a strong signal to us. We are watching you. We are taking picture of you, and you better watch. And but then in recent years, they have stepped up the level and magnitude of intimidation and harassment. On August 17, 2019, when we were hosting the peaceful demonstration, hundreds of mainland Chinese students and also members of the United Front organizations surrounded us, blocking our way to start our peaceful march. When we sang Canadian anthem, they sang the Chinese anthem. They even tried to grab our flags and attack us. So they become more and more aggressive in intimidating and also jeopardizing Canadians' rights of freedom of expression.
Thank you. Is there a difference in how the various Chinese communities, mainland, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, feel impacted by foreign interference? Mr. Chan?
I think that in terms of the different Chinese diaspora community, I think they do all have a sense that it is, if they're if they're against the government essentially, that then there is a terror that they're going to be attacked by the regime somehow. And that paints, I think, a terror on people's mind that I dare not say this in public, or I dare not say this even on Canadian soil. And that is, I think, very problematic, that they're not even able to express their own views when they're out of the country to criticize the regime. And whenever they criticize the regime, they feel that there is a threat, probably never been able to return back to their country, or their family been affected if they have family there still.
Ms. Fang?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think among the various diaspora communities you mentioned, the mainland Chinese community members are by far the most vulnerable members of our community that have been subject to very serious threats, intimidation, and harassment from CCP. It's mainly because the national security and also public safety departments of China will hold their family members back home as hostages. In forcing
sorry
them
to interrupt. How can we encourage?
Sorry, Ms. Yip, you are out of time. I'm sorry to say. We'll go now to Mr. Trudel for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're learning more and more every day regarding the way the Chinese government acts. We've talked about interference in federal elections, and we've learned that there was interference in municipal elections. Chinese police stations and safeguard defenders, they've said that before it's often service centers for immigrants. They may provide food, advice, legal aid, and then it becomes a police station, an intelligence center for the Chinese government. 3 weeks ago here, the RCMP, I asked a question to someone from the RCMP. Is there information that service centers that help the Chinese community in Brossard and in Montreal? Well, here we have the Chinese Center in Montreal and the South Shore that were to help the Chinese community in Montreal. The RCMP said they had no information that those centers were Chinese police stations. And that's what we were told 3 weeks ago. A week ago, in the Journal de Montréal on the front page, well, we're told that it's 2 Chinese police stations, but the person directing those 2 police stations is now a municipal councillor in Brossard. She was helped by the Chinese state. They sent messages on WeChat. That's troubling. And in your community in Saskatchewan, Mr. Chan and Ms. Fung, have you heard that there are Chinese police stations in Saskatchewan on the one hand, and that there are candidates for municipal elections that were supported by China in your communities?
Maybe I can start first. I have been observing and also collecting data of foreign interference in elections of 3 levels of government over the last 3 decades. I also serve as political commentator on this particular topic. I have witnessed a growing level of interference from CCP over the last 30 years. Now they have not only, interfere with the municipal level, it also occurs to provincial, and then last of all, the federal level of election. And I don't want to go into all the detail because I believe that the CSIS report or many of the media report have already covered it. However, based on our observation, the United Front organizations have been playing a very important role in channeling financial subsidy from the Chinese embassy or maybe directly from the United Front Work Department of China to their preferred candidates. I have seen, the banquets, being filled with all these people. They ask their individual members to donate to the preferred candidates in order to make sure that they to ensure their winnability.
Okay, again, I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but we do have to now move to Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Fung, you just spoke a little bit about the fact that You've been investigating election interference over the past 30 years. As you know, there's a large focus right now in this country on the 2019 and the 2021 election. Would it be your opinion that we should be looking further back than that? Should we be looking at elections prior to those two, looking at 2015 and previous?
I would say, the United Front organizations were started to be established under, the help and guidance of the Chinese embassy, beginning from 1990s. And then I think up to year 2000, when they have, developed a good enough number of United Front organizations, and also with the growing of the critical mass of the mainland Chinese Canadians in Canada, they start to become more and more aggressive in infiltrating into the elections of 3 levels of government. So there's a gradual evolution of the magnitude of infiltration and manipulation. And similarly, it's the same with the intimidation and harassment. And I think now we have already reached a point that our democracy is actually, being jeopardized and it being compromised. And if our government doesn't take immediate action and take this matter seriously, I think, it is very dangerous, because it will also ruin our trust relationship with our democratic allies. Mm-hmm. Remember, we are part of the Five Eyes allies. We are also very close partner with U.S. If our country has become...
I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to run out of time, but can I just ask very quickly, did you let governments prior to recently know about your worries, your concerns about interference?
No. We've been talking about this fear, this threat for decades. In 2017
okay, again,
and 2020...
ma'am, I'm going to have to interrupt now. But maybe you can, a yes or no answer to Ms. McPherson's question. Did you let previous governments know?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, we will go to Mr. Comich for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is on the police stations that the CCP has here in Canada through these 4 subnational governments. Do any of your community members actually use these police stations in any way, or do you know of community members who do go to them? Ms. Fang?
No.
No?
I haven't heard anybody who have gone to the police station to seek services. I think the so-called the provision of services is just a camouflage.
Okay. And I'm guessing your community members, though, and yourselves as well, are on WeChat and Weibo, and you probably have community members. No, you don't use them at all on your personal devices?
I think among Hong Kongers, Canadians, we are very cautious. Very few of us will use WeChat or TikTok, etc., because we all know that the military or the CCP is behind it. So we don't want to be, tracked down on where we are, particularly after the imposition of the national security law.
Mr. Chan, is that the same experience for your community as well?
Yes, I in the Hong Kong community, very little people use those devices.
But do you sometimes have people send you, to those who are on it, do they sometimes, to save a picture, to send it to you or to community members? Like I've had people send me posters of CCP events that have been circulated now. Unfortunately, it's all in Chinese, so I can't read it. So I ask others who can read it. And these are all very recent events, they're being put on to talk about very specific things that are being pushed around and have a very specific political message intended on it. Do your community members share that, or do they self-censor themselves?
I think one of the things...
I'll let Mr. Chan go first, and then I'll go to...
Yeah, I think one of the things they saw in using those application is that a lot of the people that use those applications only speaks Chinese, so they could only get news or whatever from those sources. And another benefit they have is that people that does not speak Chinese cannot oversee those.
Ms. Fang?
Yes, because of language barrier, majority of mainland Chinese Canadian get, the information from WeChat or maybe the free community newspaper or even some of the social media platforms such as Yop BBS or QQ.ca, etc. And exactly because of this pattern, it gives the opportunity for CCP to manipulate and also spread the disinformation campaign very effectively. And this is something our government also need to pay attention to. Apart from, banning TikTok, how are we going to deal with WeChat? Because this become a main source and also, missionary spreading disinformation campaign in Canada.
So can I ask you then, in your interactions with the police services in Canada, whether it's provincial, municipal, or federal, do you think they have the necessary language skills and cultural skills to understand information when they're obtaining it from community members who are reporting things like intimidation, bullying, random protests at their workplace? I had a priest come up to me in Vancouver and tell me that he had what he believes was a CCP agent come during mass service and take pictures of parishioners and then left. So that's technically not a crime. Didn't interrupt the service, just took pictures. But how would they report that? Do you have confidence in our police services that they have the language skills and cultural skills to understand what's going on?
I think it's not only confined to the.
Sorry, Ms. Fong. I'm sorry, Mr. Chan. I'll go to you because.
Oh, sorry.
It's tough with the virtual and one in person.
The priest that you talked about, I actually went with him to see their MP, and their MP, I think it was MP Carolyn Finlay, asked the question to the public security or public safety minister, and they said, I think if I remember correctly, they said go talk to the RCMP, and the RCMP say there's really nothing we can do, and they direct us back to Ottawa, and we go to Ottawa, and they tell us to go to RCMP, and it's a loop.
Okay, Ms. Fong.
I had exactly the same experience. I think it reflects a few problems here. Number one, our enforcement department, including police and RCMP, do not have the necessary expertise and knowledge about foreign interference. And therefore, we need to make sure that they are being educated, or at least, probably there should be some kind of exchange or training workshop to bring up their level of understanding so that they know exactly what to do when they are being asked to investigate into the police station. And number two, the language skill is very limited. They don't, majority of them do not speak Mandarin Cantonese nor Fujianese. And that's why I asked for enhancement of the capacity.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Assassi for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and allow me to thank the two witnesses. This has been very, very helpful. And I should say I find it very, very disturbing that, Ms. Fong, you said that you have been harassed on Canadian soil. That is truly unacceptable. But was I correct in understanding that you said previously it was very difficult to file reports and they would constantly ask you for evidence, but since the integrated team at RCMP was established, that things have improved, I hope?
Yes, but it was also because we took the initiative to ask Global Affairs Canada to arrange for RCMP integrated national security enforcement team to meet with us. And I raised concern, and I also challenged why is it that for decades, after we have been complaining, not even one single agent has been charged or convicted. And it shows how ineffective we have been in combating foreign interference. So now I think that the situation has improved a bit. So it's a good sign, but it's not enough yet.
Absolutely understood. I've also heard people say that maybe there should be dedicated lines, so the same officials are receiving complaints from members of the community. Is that, in your opinion, an effective initiative?
I think that is a good idea. The same also, the same principle should also apply to CSIS. I've been in, meeting with CSIS to advise them about foreign interference, but from time to time, there are new people being sent to talk to me. And every time I have to start the re-education process again. So this is unacceptable. And for RCMP, I think you have raised a very good point. If there are a few people who are dedicated to, like, say, for instance, liaison with diaspora community so that they can build up their expertise and knowledge.
Absolutely. Understood. Thank you very much for that. Now, if we could go to Mr. Chan. With respect to the gentleman that you cited in your opening remarks who had been coerced, we've heard that, they sent pictures. In that particular case, the gentleman who was in Saskatchewan, because I really find this riveting, do you know what kind of coercion was used to ensure that he would return to China?
There were two tactics that I cited. One was constant phone call bombardments, just calling you and telling you awkward stuff, probably even in the middle of the night. And the second is sending you pictures of your extended family in, I think in his case, he was in China, so therefore his family in China.
So, understood. Thank you. Now, towards the end of your opening remarks, you said instead of being reactive, our government should be proactive. What did you mean by that? If you could just elaborate on that.
If I may use a quote for that, I think somebody once said, the communist wakes up early in the morning to further the cause. We must wake up even earlier. So we have to, before even they intrude on our sovereignty, on our democracy, find policy to basically tell them that you can't do that. And tell them, and even just a show of force that we are not weak on this. We will take action if you attempt to interfere in our election or our democratic institutions.
Thank you. Now, I understand that MP Yip, you wanted the last minute? No? Okay, that's fine. I was wondering if I could also ask for your comments with respect to the press and media as well, whether that was also influencing elections or politicians, in your opinion?
Is that a question for me?
Both of you, actually.
The Chinese language media have been playing a very important role in exerting influence over voters of our Canadian society. And as I mentioned before, because of the language barrier, Chinese Canadian voters get the source of information mainly from the Chinese language media. However, majority, I would say, of the free community newspaper are either under direct or indirect control of CCP, because I understand that they get the funding from the Chinese embassy, and sometimes we call that the social stability maintenance fee. And so they use it to control the narrative, the message being sent out through these media. And the other is the WeChat and also social media platform. So I think it's about time for our government also not just to pass the foreign influence registry, but also to consider other measures to be taken to combat influence in other aspects, including the media, which is a very, very seriously infiltrated sector.
Thank you, Mr. Elsassi. That's your time. We'll go now to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you. I'd like to continue with Mr. Elsassi's questioning about Chinese language media. We've had witnesses in front of this committee previously, I believe in the previous parliament. Victor Ho, who's the former editor-in-chief of Tsingtao Daily, has indicated a very similar view to Ms. Fung here today, that a lot of Chinese language media in Canada has been co-opted by the PRC. It's something also that CSIS noted in its briefing and assessment to the Prime Minister in documents that it released to another committee of the House of Commons, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I want to ask you a question by highlighting an allegation that I heard in the fall of 2021 that I've looked up, that I took note of at the time. And I want your opinion if you've heard of similar things going on in Chinese language media. I heard allegations that hosts on a local radio station in Vancouver, AM 1320, were instructed not to interview a certain Conservative MP or even mention that Conservative MP's name on air. One host subsequently did interview this Conservative MP and was terminated. The other host mentioned this Conservative MP's name on air, simply mentioned his name on air, and had his broadcast hours reduced for having mentioned the name on air. I found this to be a shocking allegation for a regulated broadcaster in Canada. I referred the matter to the appropriate authorities in the federal government. I'm wondering if you've heard of similar kinds of examples of Chinese language media, particularly CRTC-regulated media, that have public licenses having been co-opted by the PRC in such a way.
This kind of situation is not confined to the West Coast. This is also happening in East Coast. Radio station, TV stations have all been infiltrated, or from time to time, the management staff will be summoned by the Chinese embassy for advice to them, as you know what they need, what they should report on, or whom they should avoid interview with. So in 2019, there was instruction from the Chinese embassy advising a lot of the Chinese language media to reduce the coverage on the Hong Kong related news because too many support actions going on in Canada. And I personally have been blacklisted by a Chinese language Fairchild TV here. They're one of the management who has already left asked the reporters and editors that I should not be interviewed by them. So it is a very concerning situation we are in because they either exercise self-censorship or they kowtow to the so-called advice from the Chinese embassy. Maybe because they pay more attention to who pay for the ads, but that shouldn't be the case. And CRTC has not done a good job either, because many years ago, CRTC has approved the lending of 9 mainland Chinese TV station programs to Canada, allowing them to spread the communist ideology and also the pro-Beijing programs on Canadian soil. But we have never been allowed to lend our Canadian program in China. So why should we continue to do so? I think it's about time for us to evaluate, all these policies.
Thank you. Mr. Chan, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, there was actually another case that's widely known in the community. It was a pro-democracy. She had a program on, I think, one of the Vancouver's radio station, and she played a song that was pro-Hong Kong democracy. And then subsequently, her schedule was reduced to 1 day a week. And I think that is a case that we heard about, and it's widely known in the community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong. I believe the Liberal side has asked all the questions it wishes to. So in the time remaining, we will give half of it to Mr. Trudell and the other half to Ms. McPherson.
Bien.
So,
how much?
Merci.
Thank you. Ms. Fung, earlier you had started talking about something very interesting, elections. You've been looking at this for 30 years, federally, provincially, municipally. Here, in the House of Commons, in the media, mainstream media in Canada, it's like an electroshock, the fact that potentially China intervened in the electoral process. That's a major thing. You seem to trivialize this a little bit, saying that you've been looking at this for 30 years, you've seen this before. Could you elaborate on what you began to say? You seem to say that you knew candidates, you've identified candidates who had been formally assisted by China, municipally and provincially. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yes. Over the last, maybe I can actually, even before I came to Canada. Oh, is the sound system not working?
It's
Hello?
fine. No, we can hear you. We can hear you well.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. Over the past few decades, I have, witnessed the evolution of China's infiltration in elections. They have changed from a more reactive strategy to the current very arrogant and active strategy to send their own people to run for offices, including some underground party members. And they have also, broken a lot of Election Canada rules and regulations to provide donations from abroad. A couple of years ago, before Elections Canada changed its rules and regulation, when we tracked down on some of these donations, they came with decimal points. Why? Because the donation was made in foreign currency. So when it was transferred here, it becomes an amount with decimal points. And then apart from that, paid so-called volunteers, but they are paid volunteers, were sent to help with their preferred candidates' election campaign. And I think some of the names being, disclosed recently as part of the 11 names of MPs. I think that they also got that kind of assistance, from the embassy through the United Front organization. But it is not confined to that. There are also other tactics being deployed by the pro-Beijing camp and also by some of these people advocates, strong advocates that are very close to the Chinese embassy. They have. I also understand that they have been using the anti-Chinese, racism narrative to silence people who are critical towards Beijing policies.
Ms. Fung, we have to interrupt now and give the last 2.5 minutes to Ms. McPherson.
Yes, 2.5 minutes is not very long, but thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of the witnesses. As the last person asking questions, I will just pass it back to both of you. Ms. Fung, could you just tell us the final message you'd like to give to this committee on how Canada should be dealing with these police stations, with the foreign interference writ large in our elections, in a broad sense? You have about a minute.
Yeah, this is a very serious, Canada has been under very serious challenge from foreign interference. It's about time for our government and also all federal parties to take this matter very seriously. What we need is immediate action to combat foreign interference instead of forever consultation. And we cannot wait. Time is not with us, particularly in terms of foreign interference in election. We need to pass the foreign influence registry as soon as possible, hopefully before the next election is called. At least we can subject some of these agents and entities to sunlight so that our government, our bureaucrats, our elected members know exactly whom they are dealing with. It also offers, reference, information of reference to RCMP to hold these people accountable.
Mr. Chen?
In response to Mr. Trudell's question before, but he asked me what is happening in Saskatchewan. One of the things I really want to put into record is the Confucius Institute in the University of Saskatchewan. It's still there. And the Confucius Institute, I think a lot of people know, it's been referenced by CSIS, FBI, and the MI6 as potential threat to espionage and academic espionage in campuses. So that's what I wanted to say. And also, I think at the end of the day, it's back to my message before, proactive instead of reactive.
Thank you very much. To our two witnesses, I would just like to report something that was told to another committee by the acting commissioner of the RCMP. Apparently, with these police stations in Vancouver and Toronto, the RCMP, acting on solid evidence, put cruisers outside. And that led to them being shut down. So there was, in fact, some immediate work there. We've also heard, especially from our two witnesses right now, a lot of comments about things that are going on. I think the committee might value you following up with written material. Name names. We seem to be shooting at ghosts here because there's an insinuation that this happened or a suggestion that that happened. It would be very useful to us, I think, to get some specifics that we can turn over to the authorities if necessary. In any event, it is time to wrap it up for this evening. I'd like to thank our two witnesses. I'd like to thank our translators, technicians, the analysts, our clerk, of course, and our staff who are here with us tonight. Thank you all for your time. It's a great session. Meeting adjourned.